Hello, my name is John Malloy, Director of the Center for Public Ethics at Martin Luther University College, based in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Welcome to The Moment. In this series, we explore the choices we make together in support of the common good. You're listening to our special series entitled Beyond Culture Wars, Fostering Solidarity in an Age of Polarization, which looks at our upcoming 2024 conference to be held at Luther in Waterloo from April 18th to the 20th, exploring a more positive role for religion in countering our current culture wars mentality. Today we're in conversation with Neal DeRoo, one of the organizers of the conference and a professor of philosophy at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, which is co-hosting the event. Welcome to The Moment, Neal.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.
Well, we're very, very excited about hosting this conference at Luther, and I know that you're one of the driving forces behind it, one of the people who came up with the idea for it. So, first of all, before getting into the idea behind it, maybe you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work and interests and how that fed into deciding to do a discussion on polarization.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So my interests are mostly in contemporary, mostly European philosophy, especially a tradition called phenomenology, which sort of is the study of experience and how we experience the world. And with that as my sort of background or method, I really look at two main areas. So one is in philosophy of religion, sort of how do we understand religious experience and the religious nature of experience. And the other is in, I guess, what we would call social or political philosophy, especially issues of feminism, racism, anti-oppression, those kinds of questions and issues. And so those are kind of the background areas that I'm coming from. And I guess in some ways this led the overlap of philosophy of religion and issues of like racism and sexism. Those two kind of come together increasingly in recent years in studies and looking at people who are looking at the effect of those kinds of quote unquote social political issues on the church, right? So racism in the church or misogyny, sexism, patriarchy in the church, and how this impacts people's desire to be religious or shapes how they are and how they understand their being religious. And so in that sense, I think we've seen in recent years, especially south of the border, but increasingly here in Canada as well, the ways in which people who self-identify as Christian, at least in the public eye, seem to be pushing themselves more and more into directions that are extreme, I guess, in terms of being seen to support racist structures or being seen to support people like Donald Trump and everything that he stands for. And so I think that's part of where this question of polarization and religion and polarization, sort of where that comes and how that got on my radar.
And how do you define polarization for you personally and in the context of this conference?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. For me, when I think of polarization, I think we tend to talk in terms of continuums, right? When we're talking about, let's say, the political spectrum, or even within Christianity, we talk about the theological spectrum, right? And when we use that language of spectrum, like the color spectrum, it's a continuum. You've got an extreme end, you've got lots of grades in the middle, and then you've got another extreme end on the other side, right? So in the political spectrum, right, you've got your far right, you've got your far left, and then you've got all kinds of shades in between, right? And so for me, how I understand polarization is when people are increasingly moving towards and feel like they need to move towards one of the edges of that spectrum, right? They feel they need to push towards an edge, and that occupying a place in the middle of the spectrum becomes an increasingly less tenable position to occupy, right? It's just not a place people can be. They feel they have to choose one side or the other.
Well, I've heard someone describe our current state of public dialogue as being one where I will have my thoughts. They are right. They are correct. There are people out there who don't agree with me. They're either very bad people or, for the most part, people who need to be educated. And once we tell them the facts, they will come around to my way of understanding the world. And for the rest of them, hopefully we can do enough to keep them on the margins or the edges, make sure they don't get any political power or have a voice. I don't think that's a bad description of the way many people think. So I'm wondering, how do you, you seem to, you're sort of nodding your head. I know this is a podcast, but you're nodding your head. How is this attitude fitting into the conference discussion? This kind of, I'm right, and unfortunately, the rest of the world is either unenlightened or bad people.
Yeah, no, that's when I talk about this with people, I sort of characterize it as, right, the people who disagree with me are either evil or stupid, right? Those are the options, right? You either agree with me or you're dumb or you're evil, right? Those are the choices that you have. And to me, I think this is just, I mean, as a social or political discourse, right? It's not a real discourse. You can't have conversations with people in that light because you're not actually listening to anyone, right? And so for me, I think this is where, so my background, as I said, is in this movement called phenomenology, which looks at the study of experience. And this is what I love about phenomenology, is phenomenology helps us when we get in a situation where I think something and then I encounter someone who thinks something very different about the same thing, right? We're having a different experience of the same thing. Phenomenology helps me say not which of us is right, but why do we experience this differently? What is shaping us? What is making me have a certain experience that the other person is not having, right? And so we don't have to say who's right or wrong. We're trying to understand why we experience this thing differently, right? And to me, that's a much more fruitful way to have these conversations, even within the church. Let's stop talking. Let's not figure out right away who's right or who's wrong, because that's not even usually the right question. Let's talk about, why are we having this different experience? Why are you so opposed to what I take to be obviously true, right? What are the backgrounds? What are the things in our histories? What are our motivations? What are the things that are driving us to have this differing experience? And let's try to talk about that, and let's get that on the table, because that helps us grow closer as people, right? But also, I think in the end, gives us a better way to understand the role that the concepts, that the ideas we're talking about play in our lives and in our shared lives together. Because I think a part of the issue is we sometimes, and maybe especially in religious conversations, we want our beliefs, our concepts, our ideas to play the determining factor in ways that most concepts and ideas, they just don't have the weight to do that. They're not strong enough to carry that much weight. We don't care that much about ideas in our everyday life, right? So I think that's where we have to sort of resituate those in the context of some other elements of our experience as we live it.
But there will be critics who say, look, at the end of the day, we can speak all we want about how we all need to get together, we all need to get along, that sort of thing. But at the core of most, if not all, religious traditions is the sense of, I have found the truth. And even though I may tolerate people who have different views, deep down, I know that I have found the truth. And that's not just a personal experience, it's a spiritual experience. I'm part of a community that says this is the ultimate truth. And so what's interesting, I think, about religious folk coming together to discuss polarization is there's going to be critics out there who say, why would you people be discussing polarization? You've been the source of polarization. So how do you square that circle and address that criticism?
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Historically, that has certainly been the case, and especially in the last few centuries, the way that religious people have sort of, I should say, mostly Christian people in the West have understood, truth to work that way. But for me, and this is the philosopher in me coming out, I suppose, a lot of this comes down to what we mean by truth, right? And so we have philosophy in the last couple of 100 years has really globbed on to this sense that truth is the correspondence of my ideas that I have in my head with the states of affairs in the world out there, right? And so truth is a thing that is primarily about propositions. It's about things we think, right? What we think is what is true. But as a Christian, so my own personal religious background is as a Christian. As a Christian, we're part of a tradition for which truth is not does not attach primarily to propositions and concepts. It attaches to a person, right? Jesus says, I am the truth. He doesn't say, I know the truth, or I have the truth, or I think some true things. He says, I am the truth. In that sense, truth is personal before it is propositional, at least in the Christian tradition, right? That I'm a part of. And so I think that's why what that does in religious circles is, or at least in Christian religious circles especially, it gives us a way to think truth differently, right? It doesn't have to be about possessing right propositions. And I think you find this in most other religious traditions as well, that the way that they wrestle with truth is not first and foremost about things we think. There are things we think, but that is not first and foremost what the truth is about. So even in certain Eastern traditions, let's say certain Hindu traditions and even certain Buddhist traditions that value meditation, right, in certain forms of sort of spiritual attunement, I think in those regards we would say, look, this is not about getting the right propositions and thinking the right things. It's about aligning oneself with the world in the right ways, right? Aligning my chi, my energy in the right ways with the world in certain traditions. And so I think that's part of, for me, when we talk about polarization and we talk about, disagreements, what we have to do is realize that we can disagree about propositions, we can disagree about concepts, and still share the same truth, right? We can be living truthfully. So Augustine, one of the sort of major figures in early Christianity, he talks about doing the truth, right? Living the truth. Truth is not a thing we think first and foremost. It is a way we are. It is a way we live. It's who and how we pattern our lives after, right? Which spirits enliven us and inspire us, right? Those are things I think that ways in which to talk about truth that are much more historical, right? That's in the Western tradition. This is how we've thought about truth for much longer than we have with this narrow sense of sort of oppositional content. And it's a kind of truth that I think is much more resonant with our everyday lives, right? In that, like I said before, we can think a lot of things and concepts and propositions, but that actually does very little in how we live our lives. It's sort of a question of the heart. Our lives is much more a question of the heart, much more than it is a question of what we think in our heads.
But I want to press you, if I can, a little bit by saying, I mean, the title of the conference is Culture Wars, and there will be voices on both sides of the issue who will say ultimately the position that's being taken by society is wrong, is evil, whether we're talking about abortion or issues around LGBTQ plus community, that these positions, they're cultural issues, culture war issues, that one side is wrong and one side is right. And I guess, how do we get beyond that? Because the reason why they're saying that is, I'm going to disagree with your opinion, they may say, but they're also saying the outcome of that is women are denied basic rights over their bodies, or the unborn are, they would use strong terms, are killed or murdered. I mean, you've got that. So how do you kind of take your, which I think is a fascinating approach, but how do you connect that? And I guess in some ways, perhaps that's part of the discussion that we're going to have at Luther in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the discussion for sure. I would say, for me, my first response to that is to get to the point where, okay, let's have the conversation. What are the outcomes we are after, right? What is it that we're looking for here? Because if we take, for example, there's a lot of data out there. I'm no expert in this area, but there's a lot of data out there that suggests if your outcome is to reduce the number of abortions, the best way to do that is not by banning abortion, it's by adding more social programs, right? You make abortion legal so that the people who need it can have it, but then you figure out what is making people actually have abortions, and then you deal with those issues. You provide more parental leave, more financial support for young mothers, right? All those kinds of things, right? And so I think if we can actually have the conversations about what are the outcomes we're after, right? Like, what is it about this that you think is bad or that you think is wrong? What are the outcomes you're trying to avoid? Then I think we can have more productive conversations about how to achieve those outcomes, right? I think in a lot of these cases, what happens is these culture war issues, as you were talking about them, they become just that. They become issues, right? They become abstract issues that we're talking about apart from any actual concrete conditions or situations. We're not really thinking anymore, what are the outcomes we want, except I want this bad. Well, why, right? What are we trying to avoid? What is the, right? And that, I think, even if we could get to the point of just having those conversations, right? Yes, you tell me why you think X issue is so problematic for you. What is it that you're after that you want to see stopped? What is it that you want to see minimized, right? What are the dangers? What are the whether they're social outcomes, whether they're biological outcomes, like what are the things you want to avoid or you want to increase and allow? Let's have that conversation rather than just, as you put it, this issue is wrong, and so no one should do that or something like that. Okay, but like let's talk about what are the outcomes we're trying to avoid, right? What is it that you're worried about really happening, right? And let's have that conversation. And I think that's a more productive way to have the conversation, because we might find, right, if we could shift that conversation, right? What we might find is people, if we stick with your abortion issue, people who are anti-abortion and people who are pro-choice, I think, right? That's the thing. Very few people are pro-abortion, right? Let's say people who are pro-choice, right? If we can have that conversation, we might find, hey, so we want to minimize the number of abortions that people are having. Maybe actually so do people on both sides, right? And so maybe how could we do that? Well, let's increase the ease with which people can put up children for adoption. Let's make adoption easier, right? Let's increase access to foster homes for people who need temporary care of children while they are maybe getting their lives together, overcoming addictions, things like that. Let's increase financial supports for young parents and young mothers, and increase access to health care for young mothers and pregnant women. And let's do some of these things that maybe will help, that data shows will help reduce abortions, and that other people would also be in favor with, right? Like we actually might be able to find some things where we can work together. And you have to look pretty hard on our polarized internet, but there are examples of these kinds of conversations happening and people working together across lines to accomplish some of these kinds of programmatic goals, right? People who would self-identify as anti-abortion or pro-life, and other people who would identify as pro-choice, working together to increase access to adoption agencies, for example, and increase healthcare for pregnant mothers. Like, there's people doing this work, right? And I think if we can shift to those kinds of conversations, that's helpful, right? Away from what is the issue in a sort of conceptual and abstract sense to what on the ground are we trying to actually change? What do we want to see in the context of our lives?
So in a sense, the conference is a conversation about having conversations. And maybe we want to talk a little bit about the conference and sort of how it's been envisioned, the types of discussions you see going on, and whether you think, I mean, is this fertile ground for religious people, for Christians to deal with polarization that's going on around us? So how has the conference been sort of organized, or the concept behind it?
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought in those terms, but when you said it's a conversation about having conversations, in a lot of ways, I think that's right. Because I think if we look at the current state of our society, but also of, our religious communities, again, especially Christian communities, right? Our churches are just as polarized, if not more so, than society as a whole, right? I think, and in those kinds of polarized conversations or polarized situations, the problem is people don't know how to have these conversations. How do I safely express my views, right, when I'm worried, and genuinely so, right? I have had numerous friends who have lost jobs, who have lost friends, who have lost family members, who have lost communities by expressing their position on some of these culture wars issues, right, and expressing it publicly. And so in that kind of a context, it is difficult to have genuine, real conversations. It is difficult to have these, let's get to the root of what we're really seeking and why we have these disagreements. And so what we end up with, and this is the situation I think we find in a lot of these religious communities now, you have people who have real questions about the positions that they hold or that they have previously held or that they've been taught to hold, but they don't know how to talk about those questions. They don't know where to talk about those questions. And so, I give some talk somewhere. I'm doing my philosopher thing and raising questions and issues. And afterwards, I have people come to me, or days later, they email me, "Hey, thanks for your presentation. I don't know why I'm even telling you this, but you seem like you'd be willing to hear it." And then they pour out to me all these struggles, all these questions they have with things they've been taught or things they used to think or think they have to think, but they're not sure they can anymore. And this happens to be over and over again around the country, right? No matter where I'm speaking, no matter where I'm going, all over the place. And the first thing I have to say to these people is, okay, first thing I want to say is, like, these are very normal questions you're having, and literally thousands, if not millions of people around the country are having these questions too. And they're always like, you can see the relief in their face. Really? I'm not alone? I'm not the only one who's thinking about these things? No, there's lots of people out there thinking about these things, having these questions, wanting a place to talk about these things, right? And so a part of what that's really, in what sense, one of the things that motivated for me this conference is so many people are having these questions, struggling with these issues, but they don't know that other people are. So let's have a place in public where these people can come and realize, I'm not alone. Look at all these people here who are wanting to have these conversations. Look at all these agencies and organizations that are places that will help me have these conversations, right? And then one of the things we really hope will happen at this conference, or as a result of this conference, right? So we're going to have several workshops and several people who they're leading these workshops, whose job is helping people create the conditions in which people can safely have these conversations, right? How do we have these? How can I go back to my church and say, I have these questions. A lot of people here have these questions. It doesn't mean we want to disagree. It doesn't mean we think you're wrong if you don't have those questions. It just means we have questions. We want to talk about why you think this and why other people think differently. We want to get to the root of what is the background? What are the reasons, but also what are the experiences, the life experiences that go into that? Right? We want to have these conversations and not just be told, this is what you have to think. Don't ask me why. Just think what I tell you, right? So we want to help equip people to be able to take these conversations, go back to their home communities, and teach them this is how we can have these conversations with the people you love and care about, right? Back in your own communities, this is how we can have these conversations, because a lot of people want to have these conversations, and when we don't let them have the conversations, they leave. Right? This is a problem in religious communities when we don't let people have the conversations that in their heart they feel they need to have, when we don't let them genuinely wrestle with their moments of conscience, with what, in the Christian tradition, in my traditions, we would say, with what the Spirit is putting on their heart. When we don't let them wrestle with those questions, they find places where they can, right? They leave. Or they think this whole religious thing is just not for me, right? Because it seems like God is telling me I need to have this, but the religious community is telling me, no, that's not a thing we do here. So I guess the religious thing is just not for me, right? And I think we need religious communities to be places where people can be themselves and genuinely wrestle with where they are at in their religious journey, right? In their walk with God, as we might want to talk about it, right? And then we have to make it so that they can do those kind of things. And that's one of the things that we're hoping from this conference is it'll be a place where people can come and ask the questions that they ask, right? Talk about those issues, the things that are bothering them, but also a place where we're hoping to equip them. Here's how to have those conversations now with people at home. Right, with people, go back to your house. This is how you have those conversations in your congregation, or at your institution, or in your job place, in your workplace, in wherever. Right, this is how you can have those conversations with the people you really want to have the conversations with. Right, it's a sign of how much people love and care for each other that they want to share their real struggles with people, right? And it's harmful to people when they can't do that with the people they love and care about the most.
And do you think that Christianity, I'll be specific and say Christianity, but I'm sure it applies to religion in general, that there is a call for Christians to fight polarization, that beyond, I mean, you're talking about, bringing these conversations back, but then in fact, there is a call of our faith to entertain these conversations. Jesus spent a lot of time with the so-called enemies, with whether it's the unclean in terms of people with leprosy, whether the Samaritan woman, and hanging out with tax collectors. I mean, is this not just beyond the church trying to get its act together, or various churches, and actually Christians living out their faith, which is it's not the easiest call, because we always joke there's so many people out there in this polarized world, all they have to do is agree with me and then we won't be polarized. That Christians actually, if you want to live out your faith, you got to get beyond that. I mean, is that not a difficult but a very real call?
Yeah, no, I think so one of my friends and person I used to work with quite closely when I was at Boston College with him, is one of my friends is Richard Carney, and he does a lot of work on sort of hospitality in and as religion, right? Religion as a form of hospitality, and the role of hospitality in religion and as part of our religious imagination. And so I think, yeah, absolutely. In the Christian tradition, but not just in the Christian tradition, right? The Islamic tradition, for example, has a long history of talking about the role of hospitality in Arabic culture and in Muslim cultures, right? Like the role of hospitality is huge in a lot of these traditions. I think back in the Christian tradition, with the one with which I'm most familiar, I think there we see one of the metaphors, one of the images of the church that I think we have to talk a lot more about than we do, is the image of a body of Christ, right? And the Bible is clear over and over again. The body of Christ is not made up of uniform individuals who all look the same and think the same and act the same, right? It is a body with different members who have different gifts, who have different challenges and different points of brokenness. And our job is to work together as one body, inspired by one spirit, as Apostle Paul puts it, and working together as one body, right? So if we say, yeah, as long as everyone thinks what I think, as long as everyone is willing to be an arm, we can definitely work together. But 20 arms can't work together, right? That's not a body. That's just a bunch of dismembered arms, right? We need to remember we are a body. And bodies are made of different parts, right? Where the parts need to be different. This is crucial, right? This is part of what makes us a functioning body. And that's easier said than done, right? Like this, even for myself, I know this. People have brought this to my attention. I'm starting to recognize it in the last few years, but it's still easy to be like, yeah, but maybe they could be a part of the body the way that I want them to be part of the body, right? But that's not how it works, right? Like that's the problem, right? It's the problem, but it's also the beauty, right? It is also the beauty when it works well. It's the beauty of the church is this is one of the few places left in our society maybe where I can be with people who aren't like me, right? Who don't think like me, who don't act like me, who don't have my same hobbies, who aren't in my same socioeconomic class, who aren't of my same racial profile, right? I can be with people who are genuinely different from me, right? And we can find a way to be in community. I can encounter people who are different from me at work, but I do my job and they do their job, and that's where it is, right? We don't have to get to know each other. We don't develop a community across those differences, right? So I think in an ideal world, the church is actually a primary source for fighting social polarization, because it is the place where we should be able to acknowledge and sort of inhabit different political ideas, different social ideas, right? Those different ideas should be different racial identities. Those should be in place at the church, right? That's a place where we should be in community across those differences. Historically, we haven't been, of course, right? And there's a lot to apologize for and a lot to think through there about why we haven't done that and where we've fallen short. But in an ideal world, I think the religious communities, Christian communities, but religious communities in general, actually should be a place to model this kind of beyond polarization, this kind of communal living across different identities, right? We are the model that should hold for society, and we have not been doing that. We have not been shining the light of Christ, to use again Christian metaphors and images, right, in ways that we have been called to do in the Bible.
Well, this sounds like a very exciting conference is coming up. We're going to be devoting some other podcast series getting into the actual agenda, but just at a very high level, we have a number of very exciting keynotes. Kristen DeMay and James Smith will be speaking, and then there's a series of workshops. I don't know if you want to say a little bit about our keynotes and some of the highlights that you see coming up.
Yeah, sure. I think, in terms of the keynotes, you mentioned them. Kristen Kobus DeMay, author of Jesus and John Wayne, a New York Times bestseller, just a phenomenal book in sort of in pulling together the different pieces and highlighting how many different positions the church has come to hold in the 20th century, and come to hold as if that's what we always believed. And she does a good job of showing, well, no, actually, we started thinking this, right? Like the official Christian position, there was no Christian official position on abortion until the late 70s or early 80s. And what was there beforehand tended to be mostly pro-choice. And it was a conscious decision started by the Republican Party, actually, and Dr. Dobson at a Republican Party meeting saying, yes, we will take this and we will make this, we will start to talk about this in the churches, we will make this an issue in the churches. Right. So, and I think that kind of history is shocking for someone like me. I grew up in a sort of broadly evangelical church, reformed by background, but influenced by a lot of evangelical Christianity. I grew up staunchly anti-abortion, staunchly pro-life, and had no idea that this is where it came from or how recent a turn that was in Christian tradition. Right. So,
you mean evangelical Christian tradition?
Yes. Sorry. White evangelical Christian traditions. Yes. I need to be careful about that. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
And then James Smith?
Yeah, Jamie Smith, James K.A. Smith, really popular Christian philosopher, Christian thinker. His probably his most famous book maybe is You Are What You Love. But he's one of the things he really is good at talking about is this move I talked about earlier, getting us beyond a sort of a cognitive account of Christianity as just being about what we think, and helping us see, actually, you think about your life every day, how much of what you do actually do you think about first? How much of it is actually based on conscious choices or conscious decisions you make? Very little of it, right? We're not primarily driven by what we think. We are not primarily thinking things, as he would put it, right? We are primarily driven by what we want, by what we love. We are loving things first and foremost. And so if that's the case, then if we pattern our Christianity as about thinking and try to teach you the right things to think, like in a 45-minute sermon or something like that, but we aren't shaping what you love and what you want, our Christianity will only be surface level. It will never get to the depths that will actually shape people's lives and how they think and how they live and how they are in the world. And so he's a real good challenge in terms of rethinking what we're trying to do with Christianity.
So this sounds like a very exciting, I'd say 3 days, but we start sort of on the Thursday evening and go through to Saturday afternoon. We're going to be devoting some other podcast time to discussing, as I said earlier, the agenda and a little bit more about some of the workshops, but certainly the two keynote speakers sound like they're going to be adding a great deal to this discussion. And for people who are listening, if you're interested in registering for the conference or just want to find out more information, you can visit our website at luther.wlu.ca. Under the Spotlight section has all the links and all the information. It's $75 for the 3 days, which includes the two keynotes and workshops, and I think a chance to explore a very, very important topic. So, Neal, I want to thank you very, very much for your role in organizing this conference, but also in joining us today and talking about the conference, but I think in a broader sense, this issue of polarization, which it seems every day is becoming more and more of a problem for our society, and really an obstacle as we come together to try to address some pretty serious issues.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Appreciate you having me on. I'm really looking forward to this conference. As you said, I think it's going to be a great event. I really hope to see you there and lots of people listening as well. It's going to be wonderful and just a great chance to sort of really think about what we're trying to do together, in the world, and about the forces that are driving us apart, right? And how do we counter some of those forces?
So all those listening, the conference is Beyond Culture Wars, Fostering Solidarity in an Age of Polarization. Will be held at Martin Luther University College in Waterloo from April 18th to the 20th. And to register or find out more, visit Luther's website, luther.wlu.ca. And under the Spotlight section, you'll find all the information and links. So I want to thank my special guest, Neal DeRoo, for joining us here on The Moment. And we look forward to future episodes.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of The Moment, a production of the Center for Public Ethics at Martin Luther University College, the founding institution of Wilfrid Laurier University, located in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Visit our website, luther.wlu.ca, for resources and more information on other podcasts. The technical producer of today's recording was Christopher Macheline, with support from Alex Kinsella. Creative Commons music was provided by Jason Shaw on audionautics.com. Thanks for joining us.